Hi, I'm Peter Hodgson. I'm an interaction designer working on conversations with the Google Assistant. And over the next few minutes, I'll be describing the core pillars to be conscious of when you're designing conversational experiences and some hard-learned design lessons. But first, let's talk about conversation itself. For many people who are new to designing and building conversational experiences, this is the big question in their mind. I mean, you can talk, I can talk, how hard can it be? Well, it turns out that we humans have had a lot of practice with conversation. Recent evidence suggests that humans have been conversing for up to 500,000 years. Researchers have discovered that the common ancestor of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens had the hyoid bone in their throat, which controls the tongue. And conversation is inherently social and contextual. Every one of us here has been practicing speaking since before we could walk, so it's literally instinctive to us, which makes it extremely complex and subtle and hard to codify. As a colleague of ours likes to say, we don't have to think about conversation in the same way that fish don't have to think about the water. The key point for us all is that people aren't going to change how they converse anytime soon. So we need to design conversational interfaces to match people's expectations. We're teaching computers to speak human, not the other way around. The good news is that people have been studying and researching language for a long time, and we can leverage that knowledge when designing conversational interfaces. And when you're starting to design conversations, there are 3 ideas or pillars that I think you should pin on the wall. The first pillar is the cooperative principle, identified by the philosopher of language, Paul Grice. It describes the rules and assumptions we all abide by in our conversations, and we do so entirely subconsciously. His maxims of quality, quantity, relevance, and manner can be used as reliable guidelines when you're creating conversations. For example, the maxim of quantity says that we expect participants in a conversation to, and I quote, not make their contributions more or less informative than is required to advance the conversation. And I'll bet you can all recall conversations you've had with people who are not abiding by this maxim. That's the person who talks too much or the person who doesn't say enough. So I encourage you all to study the cooperative principle in detail. If the cooperative principle deals with the content or the fuel of a conversation, then turn-taking is the engine and the gearbox, and it's the second pillar to bear in mind. Turn-taking is the mechanism by which we resolve ambiguity and repair conversations in order to progress to a final resolution. Linguists will refer to people handing the turn or taking the turn in a conversation, and in the real world we use linguistic prompts, questions, or just body language to signify when the turn should be taken. For the moment, virtual assistants understand none of these subtle social cues. So turn-taking for conversational assistants has to be more explicit, and we have to manage this when writing dialogue so it doesn't become unnatural or robotic. The third pillar is to design conversations that work for the user's context. Talking to machines is still in its infancy, and people still find it socially awkward. So you should actively focus on the user's physical context and the kinds of conversations they're open to in that context. And look to design for simple, intuitive, high-value conversations while people are in socially safe environments, and where voice interactions have less friction than touch. So the 3 pillars are the cooperative principle, turn-taking, and the user context. And here are my 5 top lessons learned. First, persona. Designing your assistant's persona is not a nice-to-have, it's a must-have. There's another video in this series, and it's a detailed talk about this topic, which I encourage you to watch. But it's worth highlighting here. A persona is a style template for your brand. You should design it and use it to provide a common understanding and a reference for consistency during every step of your conversational design development. As another colleague puts it, if you don't clearly define your brand's personas, then your users will. Second, and another must-do, start with the sample dialogue, whatever the platform you'll be deploying on. Create end-to-end sample dialogues for the most likely cases. Writing the dialogue will help you discover more cases and the conversational logic you'll need to build. Don't just write the dialogue, speak it out loud with someone else. It'll change what you've written. And present dialogue to stakeholders in the audio channel, not as written text. You can record it using a TTS engine and listen to the playback. After you've nailed the most likely cases in the sample dialogues, then design all the repair cases. Designing for conversational repair is the topic of another video, but bear these things in mind. We need to make conversations work well when it goes off track. These can be points of great user frustration, and so if handled well, they're great opportunities to rebuild user trust and confidence. Your assistants should be forgiving. Remember, people are instinctively trying to be cooperative, but we're human and we make mistakes, so we need to be highly focused on helping them get back on track as naturally as possible. And here's a top tip. A key approach for identifying repair cases is to prototype the conversation as early as you can in the process. Write and perform the conversations with real users and use Wizard of Oz techniques with audio recordings to test your conversational structure and dialogue. Next, we're building a system for users to access their assistant anywhere. So you must consider your conversational experiences across modalities and surfaces. In some cases, the conversational logic might have to change depending on the surface. For example, presenting choices to users on an eyes-free device, such as a Google Home, requires different dialogue strategies than when the user can pick from a list of choices on a screen. And designing for multimodal conversations with the screen is hard. The important thing to remember is that in multimodal conversations, the screen is only one output of the conversational state. There's both audio and visual channels to be choreographed. So think hard about the best channels for information transfer. What's best on screen? What's best in audio? Where's the right balance for your conversation? In a multimodal experience, screens are really great for presenting large amounts of information. They're great for displaying touch affordances to repair or to progress a conversation more quickly than with another spoken turn. And the screens are useful for orienting the user and wayfinding in a multi-step task. Finally, with the assistant, you're designing for use over time. The second conversation with the user will always be different from the first, and the third may be different from the second. We expect a conversational assistant to understand and remember us, so the conversations should reflect that memory. Just keeping track of previous conversations and a user's context and adjusting the conversation based on these cues will increase the perception of an intelligent agent significantly. So, design your persona. Always start with the sample dialogues. Repair with context sensitivity. Design cross-platform from eyes-free to multimodal, and design for frequency. And never forget the cooperative principle. Good luck with your conversation design, and thanks for listening.